If you've been wanting to add Anthurium to your plant collection, the Anthurium Forgetii is a must-have plant. It's very unique because it has what's called a fused sinus, which means it's very round at the top. It makes for a very interesting looking plant, a little bit different from other Anthurium. They stay nice and dark, and I don't regret picking this one up at all. Now, this plant has been going crazy. It's been putting out offsets left and right that I've been meaning to separate. So today we're gonna be making a bunch of plant babies. I'm gonna make some propagations, and I'm gonna share some of my care tips for the Anthurium Forgetii. Let's get into some care tips for this Anthurium. So in its natural environment, it would be growing along a jungle floor, which means that it can tolerate low light. It would probably prefer medium indirect light. So for me, I have this shaded greenhouse here, and I just keep it on one of the bottom shelves under some of the bigger foliage. So that way it gets a little bit extra shade. The darker the conditions are, the more you'll be able to maintain the dark leaf color, which with Anthurium, that's something that is actually sought after. So that's lighting. Next, let's get into soil. It prefers something well draining. So I'm gonna be putting this into my chunky soil mix. If you aren't familiar with a chunky soil mix, I have a free PDF guide that you could download, and it'll give you a bunch of DIY soil recipes. Simple go-to chunky soil mix is gonna be 1 part houseplant soil, 1 part perlite, and 1 part orchid bark. That's just one of the many soil recipes that you'll see in my free PDF guide. It doesn't like to sit in very soggy soil, which right now, the reason that I want to repot this is because it's in this very dense peat moss based soil. It's not something that I'm very familiar with or that I feel comfortable with. So the plant has acclimated, and I'm going to be swapping out the soil today as well. As far as fertilizers go, it likes something well balanced because it is a flowering plant. So something like a 10-10-10, 20-20-20, just something well balanced with the NPK ratios in the spring and summer. That's the plant's growing season and when it could use an extra boost of nutrition. For humidity, these plants do love high humidity. In my greenhouse, at night, it gets close to 100% humidity. During the day, right now, it's at 65. Sometimes it'll drop down to like 40 or 50%, but I actually have these misters installed that go off every hour to give it a little bit of a boost of humidity. Some people like to put these plants in their at-home IKEA cabinets or indoor grow tents, stuff like that. The extra boost of humidity will serve this plant very well. Those are some of the basic care tips that I can give for this plant. Now, this plant has basically made a bunch of little babies and replicas of itself called offsets. So we're gonna be taking those offsets, putting them in their own container, growing them out, selling them, and keeping the main big one. Now, this plant is great because it's already producing flowers, which means that I could start making seeds and hybrids, which is something that I'm really looking forward to. But enough chit chat, let's get into it. All right, so the first thing that I'm gonna do is go ahead and take the plant out of the pot. Check out those roots, looking nice and healthy. It's very interesting to see, this soil is so dense, but the roots do pretty well in it. So again, I just feel a little bit more comfortable with something a little bit chunkier. So that's the reason we're gonna be swapping this bad boy out today. I'm gonna go ahead and remove all of this soil. Be right back. All right, we went ahead and used just a water hose to hose off any of that old soil. It looked like it was mostly peat moss, which again, pretty dense, and I'm looking to add something with a little bit more chunk to it today. Here's what those roots look like. Now it's time to just get into the separating of these little offsets. So there's not really any right or wrong way to do this here. Okay. What you're gonna wanna do is just grab one of those offsets there, gently massage it back and forth. There is the first offset. Let's see how many of these we can get. I like to start from the bottom, work my way up. That was a nice chunk right there. So you can see a small little root right there. Let's keep going. Okay, and here is our main plant. One of the reasons I wanted to go ahead and separate all these is because this main stem will now have a better opportunity to produce even bigger leaves because it doesn't have to worry about the smaller ones kind of taking the nutrients from the main stem here. We could pot this up in its own container now. I'm gonna throw these in shade because we're gonna be doing something a little bit different with those. We'll only go up 1 pot size here. It was in about a 4.5 inch. Here I have a 5, and I might even go up to a 6 actually. So here's the old pot that the plant was in. Here's the new one. As you can see, I'm just going up 1 pot size. This thing has a pretty solid root system. This 6-inch pot is gonna do just fine. And of course, I've got my chunky soil here, a lot of perlite, houseplant soil, orchid bark, some cocoa chips, leca, bunch of great stuff that's gonna really add drainage to this mix. Again, be sure to check out my free DIY soil guide if you wanna make your own chunky soil mix like this one. You don't wanna go up in pot size too much because the bigger the pot size, the more moisture that's gonna be held in there, and if the root ratio to the soil ratio isn't just right, then you will encounter some root rot. So what we're gonna do is go ahead and put a small layer of soil right in here. If you aren't sure how much soil you should put in, I never go past, a 1/3 of whatever the container is. That should do just fine. Pop our plant in there. And now we just fill the container with the rest of that soil. So at this point, we got that top layer in there, but then around the sides, it's not really settling in. So what I like to do is just kind of shake the pot around to get all that soil in between those roots. I normally have a sewing needle that I use to go in and get the soil in between the roots, but today I'm using a bamboo stick. Just getting all of that soil in between those roots while trying not to damage the already existing root system. Gonna gently the top of that soil so that way the plant is supported, and this is what we're left with. And here is the final look. Definitely not as full as it was, but I think it's gonna grow out nicely. I think the next leaves are actually gonna be a lot bigger than the previous ones, so I'm looking forward to seeing how this thing grows out. I would normally chop off the flower, but I'm just gonna kind of leave it alone, see what happens. And yeah, I'm really liking this soil mix, nice and chunky. I did moisten the soil before I threw it in the container, so I'm not really gonna water it thoroughly because the soil is already moist. So I'm just gonna leave it alone, and hopefully it doesn't freak out too much. Another question I get asked a lot is why I decide to go with these clear pots that you see here. Well, the reason why I used clear containers is because I like to see what the roots are doing. I want to make sure they're staying healthy, making sure there's no signs of rot, and it helps me get a better idea of when the plant needs water and kind of break even for the whole plant that I bought. I'm also going to be cutting the flowers off of these guys because it's just going to take too much energy away from the plant. Thanks for checking out this video. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments down below. Feel free to show some love, and I'll see you in the next one.